YouTube, and welcome to this edition of Racecar Fabrication and Restoration. I'm Ronnie Humphrey, and as always, I appreciate you guys joining us. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. I sure would appreciate it, and tell your friends and family about the channel as well. I would greatly appreciate you doing that for me. I get a lot of questions regarding this 1967 Nova behind me. People see it in the background and they wonder what the story is behind it. Well, that's actually the first car that we did for this channel. And we started on it last November, almost a year ago, when we actually went and picked the car up and started working on it. So instead of people going back and watching 40 different videos, or probably 50 different videos, whatever, I decided I'd put a little highlight reel together for you and kind of tell you the history about the car. That way you can get caught up at one time without having to go back and doing a lot of research. So that's what we're going to do today, kind of a little special edition, but we'll give you the history and what all we did over the 7-month period of rebuilding this car and saving it from the scrapyard. So ride along with me and I'll tell you all about it.
A friend told me about this car that he had found up in Bossier City, Louisiana, only about 25 minutes from my house. And I went up there to look at it, and lo and behold, it was inside this barn, so I guess it qualified for a true barn find. It looked like the barn doors had been open for a long time, and I barely could get them open to go in there and take a peek, but I could see the car through the window, and I was very interested as soon as I saw it. I was able to get the doors slid open enough in order to be able to squeeze in, and boy, I couldn't believe what I found inside. When I walked in the door, this is what I found: a 1967 Nova and a 1982 Racecar built ASA Camaro. The best I can figure, the Nova had been sitting for 30 plus years. I'd say around 38 years. And the Camaro had been sitting for about the same amount of time. I had known the owners of the cars for a long time, Trey Bean, which, like I said, was the son of Harlan Bean. And Harlan passed away several years ago. And I actually watched this Nova race probably when I was about 9 years old at the Louisiana State Fairgrounds, a half-mile asphalt track. But made a deal with Trey to get both cars down there, and he asked could I restore them both. And I said, well, I'd like to keep a Nova. He said it'd be fine. So we made a deal on the Nova, and then he wanted to get the one done for his dad. I was by myself and actually had COVID at the time that I was up there loading these cars up. But I was by myself, and I didn't endanger anyone else. But like I never got the car loaded up because the front springs were missing. You can see the two before I jammed in between the A-frames to get the front end up enough so I could load it up. Just for the record, Buddy Parks, that helps me on all my videos, actually helped run this 55 car back in the day. This is what the 55 ASA race Stonkus car looked like back when it was being raced on the ASA circuit across the South. This was the first time the car had seen daylight in 30 plus years. Made it safe back to our shop and had to set it on the outside just for a couple of days so I could get things organized inside the shop so we could get it cleaned up and get it started on it. The first item of business was to get it cleaned up, and I think it felt relieved after getting about 30 plus years of dust off of it. If a car could talk, I think it felt very happy and relieved to be in a shop and feeling like it was going to get worked on. And for the record, we did go back up and pick up the 1982 ASA Race Stonkus built car, and I'm glad I did because this past February when we had Snowmageddon down here, and the biggest snow and ice storm we've ever had that I've ever seen in my lifetime, this barn in the background where the both cars were stored collapsed under the weight of the snow, and it is destroyed now. The car is now at our shop waiting on parts, but unfortunately, as I said earlier, in the snowstorm down here, the barn that housed all the parts for this car got crushed. So we are in a situation now to where we don't know if we're going to be able to do this car or not. So that's why we're currently working on the Buick Regal. The first thing we did was strip the body off the car and all the suspension. car actually had a old Chrysler 8 3/4 inch rear end. So what I did is I went and found a late model, Asphalt Pro late model that we use to get all the parts of, use as a parts donor, so we get the suspension and also the rear end as well out from under it. I found a little 602, which I thought would be a good little motor for the car, and picked it up out of Florida, and actually picked it up while we was attending the Snowball Derby down in Pensacola, Florida. But we had to do a lot of modifications to the foot box there in order for the headers to work, because I wanted to put regular asphalt over the top headers on it. Here you can see the donor quick change that we pulled out from under the Pro late model and kind of got it just dummied in here. Building the exhaust was the first major task, and I decided I would take on that. It took me probably a week and a half to get the exhaust built and fabricated. Here you can see just how much of the foot box we had to take out to get clearance for the over-the-top headers to go around behind the motor. Running the over-the-top headers also meant we had to figure out a new way to support the steering shaft, so kind of came up with a bracket here that would work. Here you can see where we've got the newer style front suspension hung on the car, but we could tell right off the bat that the A-frames and spindle height was not going to work with these stock upper control arm mounts on the frame. Went back and forth on exactly how to handle that, and unfortunately we had to do major surgery to the frame. Our original plan was to use the original lower A-frames that was on the car and the upper A-frame mounts that was on top of the frame, and then use the A-frames off the donor late model, but just the caster would not work out, the caster and camber, no matter what we tried. Here's the original lower A-frames, and you can see the step up that they had in the car in order to lower it, and there was just no way to get these to work with the aftermarket spindles that came off the donor late model. We thought if we bought new lower A-frames that might fix the problem, but we still ran into more issues on the caster and camber. The next problem was shock placement. So I cut off the frame horn on the outside edge, but we just did not have enough clearance to get the travel we needed in the suspension. So we did the inevitable. We had to take the torch and cut everything off of the frame. To say I was concerned at this point was an understatement. This is the stock shock tower and weight jack that we cut out of the frame. The first item of business was getting the lower A-frame in the position we wanted it in, and then I plated the frame rail, and then we had to figure out where the weight jack needed to go. Once we got the weight jack installed and the frame plated, then we had to figure out how in the world to run the shocks. We was hoping just to make clearance for like we showed here in this picture, but we ended up having to do a whole lot more. Here you can see what we took out and what we ended up replacing it with. Much cleaner. You can see the large hole we ended up having to make to get proper shock clearance. Once we finished up with the suspension mounts, we were able to go back and finish up the foot box so we could get the car ready for powder coat. This was also the time to go over the whole car and try to remove any welds that need to be buffed out. Before we painted the car, obviously we had to come up with a way to get the fuel cell mounted in the car, so that required building a new frame for it as well, and trying to come up with adequate fuel cell that would work in the car. I was wanting to try to use one out of the donor late model, but as you can see, it was just too nasty, so we ended up buying all new stuff for the fuel system. After about 2 months of work, or I guess 3 months at this point, we were able to get the car loaded up and headed out for powder coat. After we got the car back from powder coat, we wanted to make it into a roller first thing before we started adding the motor and stuff, and check the stance of the car, and it looked real good. Then we started adding the motor, transmission, fuel cell, and all that other stuff to make it look more complete. Of course, my grandson Reed had to come over and point out everything we was doing wrong. The exhaust turned out looking really nice. I actually ended up finding another 602 in Virginia that was brand new, but this one came with the alternator, power steering belt, serpentine belt setup. Already had a racing clutch on the back of it, so I ended up selling the original 602 I had and bought this one, and we put it in the car, and that's the one that's in it today. Here we started laying the old interior inside the car and the dash panels because I had changed stuff up. I wanted to make stuff a little bit different and make sure it would still fit after changing up the foot box and all. I'm very proud of how well the interior turned out. That was a lot of work, but it turned out very nice. I think it was 3 degrees when I was doing this work. We have never ever seen temperatures like that in Louisiana. It was tremendously cold, but able to get out here and still get some stuff done. Once we got the main interior finished up, we put the body on the car, then that way I could finish up the rear decking. Also added hinges on the trunk and hood both, and covered up some other holes in the body before we started doing the body work. We finally got started on the body work, and it didn't take as much Bondo as we thought it would. I ended up buying a new hood because the old hood had had so much of the understructure cut out, it was just too weak, so I found this hood and bought it. We finally got the car ready to prime, and Buddy is going to do it here. We moved it outside the shop, just up under the cover area, and just did it outside. We moved the car back in the shop and started doing all the final details. The last major item was getting a windshield that we made out of Lexan and got it cut to size and put it in there. It turned out very nice as well. Found a grill off of eBay that had been used, but it was in just perfect condition, so it worked out nice. And this is the final product. I went back with a paint scheme that was on a car that I raced back in 1984, and we won 12 features in 1 year. So it was kind of a throwback car for me. It was actually a Nova that I raced, but it was like a 1969, the next generation body style. But I thought it'd be fun to kind of step back, and my son-in-law did all the decals in his car, and it looks identical to what my car did back in the old days. The car just really, really looks nice. Buddy's a big part of the little project cars we do. We're just a couple of old racers that done driving and just like messing with these old cars now. Well, I hope you guys like this history of the Nova, and that's how it got to where it is.